Cannabis University, telling us what's going on with this crowd from the beach in Awaroa.
We've just got some feedback through from the Twitters about my Christchurch comment.
Yep.
Have you seen that one?
No.
About saying that the Torval and Dean place reflected Christchurch's whiteness. And the Three Boys Brewery from Christchurch say that they say, is there no better informed commentators? How white is Damien Christie in a Mount Eden cafe with his watered down fruit juice? They make a good point. I think that, look, if Christchurch has indeed changed and is now a multicultural paradise, then maybe it is time to change the Torval and Dean.
People here.
Maybe it is time to change the Torval and Dean name.
Well, here's one. Enough of your arrogant comments of your panellists, anti-Christchurch, anti-South Island White South. I'm switching off. What would you say to them?
Well, I would say that's unfortunate. I'm sorry to see them go. If they probably can't hear us anymore. But But look, my son is about to start school in Auckland, and we took him along to his class visit. He is the only Pakeha kid out of 30 kids in his class. I don't think you could say the same in Dunedin. I don't think you could say that. I'm not being racist or anti-racist or anything like that. I'm simply saying that the further you go down the country, it becomes less diverse.
All right, maybe we can have another panel on that one and bring you back, or not. And finally, academic Ekant Veer has been accused of racism.
I don't think you even want to go there, Wallace, with the story.
After using the word Pakeha.
In Christchurch.
Actually, no, we'll leave that for another time. Why don't we talk about insects? Conversations around climate change.
Can we actually this? Now, come on, let's go to this one. Let's not stray away from controversy.
All right. So Associate Professor Ekant Veer was urging councillors to be more considerate to diverse communities at a meeting, and that the needs of Christchurch's diverse residents need to be taken into account more, and urging funding for a new multicultural centre. So when he used the term Pakeha, a woman who heard his speech accused him in this Christchurch City Council meeting of casual racism, saying the language was offensive and that it means long white pig and fleas jumping off your back, which doesn't, by the way. But anyway, do you both, around the panel, Jenny, you first, do you find the word Pakeha offensive?
No, I do not. That is a European New Zealander as far as I'm concerned, and it is no different than saying kia ora rather than hello. It's just, no, I do not find it offensive.
As you heard just previously, I referred to my son as being the only Pakeha kid in his school, in his classroom. So you could probably guess that I don't think that's offensive term, or I wouldn't be calling my son that.
The particular issue, though, wasn't it, was that she accused him of casual racism, was that then she very clearly went on to demonstrate it herself by saying she'd know more than he did because she was born here.
Yes.
And he wasn't, presumably.
That's exactly right, yeah.
And I think that's, we see that every day, that people say, I'm not racist, while then being very casually racist. But, that's not racism, it's just stating fact. And how often do you hear that argument used? It's not racism, it's just stating fact.
Christchurch.
Enough from you, Damien, else I'll turn your mic off.
I would like to say, as a Christchurch resident, that, I think particularly since March 15th, Christchurch has shown that while there are racist elements in the city, like any city, that we are prepared to embrace and care for and love.
Absolutely.
And attempt to be more of a multicultural society. And I think quite a few of us have taken stock and recognised that we didn't necessarily know as much about the mosques and our Muslim friends as we should have done.
Finally,
nicely said.
Finally, words of wisdom from Jenny Morton. Also good to have you on, Damien. It's been a great panel. Damien Christie, Jenny Morton, thank you very much for being with us on Monday. Checkpoint next.
Thanks, Wallace.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. On tonight's programme, South Auckland is apparently the prison capital of the country. There's 3 of them within 4 kilometres and plans for 1 more. Enough already, say some residents. The pressure's on victim support to hand out more of the millions donated for victims of Christchurch's mosque attacks. A faulty pipe at Pike River is confirmed as the cause of high oxygen readings. So when can re-entry go ahead? An academic has been labelled a racist for using the word Pakeha. Why? And people with serious disabilities are sleeping in their cars in Whangarei as they cross their fingers for a night shelter. And survivors of the fiery Aeroflot plane crash in Moscow say the jet was hit by lightning.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leia tawa tēnei. A toddler died from suspected abuse after a hospital repeatedly failed to notice his injuries. The Health and Disability Commissioner, Anthony Hill, says the hospital failed to adequately safeguard the 16-month-old and its failures were systemic. Michael Kropp reports.
The child was taken to the hospital 4 times because he couldn't put weight on one leg. However, staff failed to spot the leg was fractured or the boy's other injuries, including bruising, a broken tooth and blackened fingernails. It was only when he was referred to a second hospital that the injuries were noticed. Mr Hill says the social worker at the first hospital then asked for Oranga Tamariki to undertake a safety plan before the boy was sent home, but a doctor discharged him anyway. The District Health Board has been ordered to apologise to the family, follow up with Oranga Tamariki and the police on the Commissioner's findings. Ko Michael Kropp tēnei.
Cabinet has made a final decision on the cannabis referendum but won't reveal its plan until tomorrow. The government has previously promised a binding referendum alongside the 2020 election on the personal use of cannabis. But according to the details released by National and what it says is a leaked cabinet paper, just one of the 4 possibilities would be binding. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, says the Justice Minister will give more details about how the government intends to proceed, but made this point.
This is not about formulating a government position, but simply formulating a question for New Zealanders to have their say on this issue.
Jacinda Ardern says she considers the leak of a cabinet paper to be a serious matter, a point she's reiterated to ministers, but does not intend to pursue it any further. There are increasing calls by people who donated money to the Mosque shooting victims for more of it to be handed out. Victim support raised $10.5 million and is also in control of almost $3 million raised by 7 predominantly Muslim groups. But so far, only $3 million has been distributed. One donor, Liz Takamore, says victim support is still sitting on far too much money.
And then in the same breath, you read about these ones that have lost loved ones that are finding it difficult to meet their mortgage payments. Why? There are some who have lost family members who haven't got the finances to buy food.
Victim support says it is preparing to hand out a 3rd tranche of funding but does not say when that will be or how much it will involve. Canterbury earthquake claimants are hopeful they will be able to recover lost money through class action against Southern Response. The government-owned insurance company was responsible for settling claims by AMI policyholders, but a Christchurch lawyer, Grant Cameron, says documents issued to policyholders before October 2014 failed to disclose the full costs of rebuilding and repairs. He says about 3,000 people didn't receive settlements they were entitled to. Homeowner Ross Williamson says the class action is good news for people like he and his wife. He thinks they missed out on about $130,000 and have been seeking compensation for about 5 years, but couldn't afford to face Southern Response alone. The delay in re-entering the Pike River mine was caused by faulty monitoring equipment, as suspected. Last week, the plan to re-enter the access tunnel, known as the Drift, was called off after high levels of oxygen were detected, making entering the tunnel potentially unsafe. This afternoon, the head of the Pike River Recovery Agency, Dingy Pattinson, confirmed one of the sampling tubes that monitor the atmosphere inside the mine leaked. He says they are continuing to test all the equipment. 29 men died in explosions in the West Coast coal mine in 2010. 2 New Zealanders and 2 Canadians have been arrested at Auckland Airport with more than 20 kilograms of cocaine and methamphetamine in their suitcases. Customs estimates the Class A drugs found in 2 separate seizures are worth more than $9 million. Tom Furley reports.
Customs stopped a 30-year-old Hamilton man and a 20-year-old Auckland woman arriving from Argentina. They found 7 kilograms of cocaine paste with a street value of $2.1 million in the base of 2 suitcases. Also, 2 Canadian women, aged 21 and 26, arrived from Hong Kong with almost 15 kilograms of methamphetamine in their suitcases. All 4 appeared in the Manukau District Court today, charged with importing and possessing a Class A drug for supply. Customs says there has been an increase in drug seizures at international airports and it serves as a warning to drug couriers. This is Tom Furley.
It's 5 past 5. A 137-run stand between Tom Blundell and Will Young has helped the New Zealand cricket 11 avoid embarrassment in their one-day practice match against Australia in Brisbane. Batting first, New Zealand were all out for 215, with Blundell making 77 and Young 60. The match also marked the return of David Warner and Steve Smith to Australian colours, having served their one-year bans after the Cape Town ball tampering affair. In reply, a short time ago, Australia were 82 for 2 after 15 overs. Warner was out for 39. The New Zealand team is without regular skipper Kane Williamson, Martin Guptill and Trent Boult, who are all still on IPL duties in India. To maintain their unbeaten run in the ANZ Netball Premiership, competition leaders, the Central Pulse, will have to buck recent history when they play the Southern Steel in Invercargill tonight. The Pulse have never beaten the Steel in Invercargill in 4 previous encounters there. Here's netball reporter Ravinda Hunia.
The Pulse are on a 12-game winning streak, having come from behind to beat the Waikato Bay of Plenty Magic 53-45 in the Super Sunday round of matches yesterday. The Steel, who are comfortably second, had a 69-58 win over the Mystics, but will be banking on a ruckus home crowd to help them topple the Pulse. While a win wouldn't put the Steel ahead of the Pulse on the leaderboard, it would be a timely boost with the two sides already assured of playoff spots. Another win for the Pulse would leave them 4 shy of equalling the Premiership winning streak of 17 games, a record currently held by the Steel. Ko Ravinda Hunia tēnei.
And that's the news.
Last time on First Up.
I had extreme fears that Craig was going to or maybe kill somebody else innocent on the roads due to his stealing of cars. I basically predicted his death.
First Up, your early morning wake up. How do you think he would have felt about receiving this honour?
I'm quite happy that society is acknowledging a brave act, selfless act to save lives for the greater good.
News and current affairs live and early. First Up on RNZ National, 5 a.m. every weekday.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula. Cloudy periods with isolated light showers in the east. For Waikato to Wellington, including Bay of Plenty and Central High Country. Mainly fine, areas of cloud or fog tomorrow morning. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, cloudy periods with isolated light showers. For all of the South Island, fine weather apart from areas of morning and evening cloud or fog, more persistent about the east coast. Chatham Islands mostly cloudy with the chance of a light shower or two. It's 5:05. You're with RNZ National.
Thanks, Susanna. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. The next story may sound like a classic case of not in our backyard. A South Auckland community fighting plans for a proposed youth justice facility in their area because of safety concerns. But residents in Manurewa are challenging any other neighbourhood in the country to deal with having a prison over their back fence, let alone 3 others within 4 kilometres. The Whakataka Pokai Care Facility currently houses up to 20 young people who are being looked after by Oranga Tamariki. But with the youth court age rising to include those up to 18 years old in July, plans are underway to repurpose the facility to accommodate an increase in youth offenders. Oranga Tamariki says the young people need to go somewhere, but Manurewa locals say they deal with many of the country's offenders and enough is enough. Our reporter Nita Blake-Person and cameraman Nick Monroe filed this report.
It doesn't take long to drive from Dean Andre's home to the nearby men's, women's and youth prisons at Wiri.
See, now we come to the correctional facilities. Don't ask me which one's the men's prison and the women's prison and so forth, because I've never been inside them. That's Korowai Manaki, obviously, because that's what the sign says. So you can see that's a youth justice facility, and as you can see, that's a prison.
Driving around the streets of Manurewa, Mr Andre declares it the prison capital of New Zealand.
There are 3 prisons here in Manurewa, and we're the only suburb or town in the whole of New Zealand that has 3 prisons. As far as I know, no one else has more than 1 prison in the area. We have 3. Now they want to put a 4th one, and I personally think that that's just totally unjust.
The 4th prison he's referring to is Whakataka Pokai, about 4 kilometres down the road in the heart of the residential suburb of Weymouth, currently a facility for children in Oranga Tamariki's care. Oranga Tamariki sent letters to Weymouth residents in January, informing them that because the youth justice age is increasing to 17, they would be changing the facility's focus from only care and protection to include youth justice. Mr Andre says that will essentially make it another prison and bring with it more pressure for social services in the area.
all the social services in Mangere are under stress, and the people are under stress. And all those people that come and visit other people in prisons, where do they stay? They stay in Mangere. They bring their problems and their troubles and their difficulties with them when they stay, and the community has to interact with all of those things on a daily basis. And another prison in the area is only going to make that worse.
Mr Andre isn't the only one worried about the plans. On 3 of Whakataka boundaries are residential houses and 1 public park with a children's playground. It backs onto the home of Lily Lee and her husband Bruce Chen.
When we first bought the house, we think, the care and the protect center is a good idea to look after these, kids. But not use just the prison. No way.
The change would also see the number of people housed at Whakataka increased from 20 to 30. Ms Lee spends a lot of time in her garden and says the prospect of teenage offenders just over the fence is a nightmare.
They think, they kind of, every community, every person should be careful for these, kids, they are our future, they are vulnerable, blah, blah. But then, who cares for us? I mean, the ordinary people work harder, do nothing wrong, always obey law, always follow the rule. I mean, the government protect or care for us.
Darcel Bell Ata is another Weymouth resident opposed to the change. She lives down the road with her husband and 3 children and is worried about escapees.
So it's that fear of what are we dealing with, and also the calibre of offender. We don't know are we talking about car thieves, or are we talking about little park vandals, or are we talking about people who have done some serious aggressive, or have serious aggressive behaviours?
She knows the kids that Oranga Tamariki will be looking after do need proper care and they have to go somewhere, but she says Weymouth isn't the place.
It's quite a built-up residential area. We've got, in this community alone of Waimahia Inlet, there are 295 homes, and all with an average of 4 to 5 in those homes. We already deal with high levels of car theft via youth and car tampering in this development.
Whakataka was used to house youth offenders in the past, but that changed in 2002 to only accommodate young people who needed care and protection. Standing outside Whakataka grounds, Dean Andre says the community was assured those days were over.
We experienced a lot of burglaries, a lot of car theft, a lot of trouble, and a very high rate of prison escapes in the 1990s. And the government acknowledged that at the time. And then they gave their word that they would close the facility to youth justice offenders and they would move them to Korowai, Manaki and Wiri.
Oranga Tamariki is headed to the Environment Court this month to have the case for redesignating the site considered. Because of the impending court action, no one was available for an interview, but in a statement said youth justice residences provided a safe, secure and supportive environment for young people to get their lives back on track. It also said the agency had undertaken a notification process and engaged in a range of community meetings around the Whakataka redesignation. It said children and young people benefited from being accepted within their own community and feeling like they had a place to belong. But Dean Andre says the community won't take the change lying down. More than 100 residents have made submissions to Auckland Council in opposition, and several will be appearing before the Environment Court. And for anyone who thinks the residents of Weymouth are a bunch of NIMBYs, Mr Andre has a message.
They say you're a NIMBY because you don't want a prison in your backyard. Well, I'm sorry, we've got 3 prisons already. When is enough enough?
And that piece from Nita Blake-Person will go up on our webpage and our Facebook page if you'd like to look at it. The Justice Minister Andrew Little will announce tomorrow what form the cannabis referendum will take at the election next year. The Prime Minister wouldn't answer questions about the referendum at her post-cabinet media conference, instead leaving it to Mr Little to announce the detail, including how binding the referendum will be. Jacinda Ardern says all 3 government parties have formed a consensus on the referendum, and while she would rather details of the cabinet paper hadn't been leaked, she's confident her ministers weren't responsible. Here's political reporter Joe Moyer.
The opposition got one up on the government yesterday after National's drug reform spokesperson Paula Bennett was leaked a cabinet paper discussing the 4 options for the cannabis referendum. Jacinda Ardern says she has reminded her ministers of her expectations around confidentiality and has asked them to pass on the message to staff and officials who also deal with the drafting of cabinet papers. She doesn't want to spend time on who might have leaked it.
Look, I actually don't want to spend too much time being bogged down by that question. I've again restated my expectations of both Cabinet, but more broadly than that. I think I should focus on getting on with the work at hand. We have not experienced the leak of a paper directly before, and I don't know that an inquiry would actually answer the question of how this came to occur.
Heading into Cabinet today, the Justice Minister Andrew Little had already faced 24 hours of questions about the leaked options, without being able to say anything about what the government was going to do. According to the opposition, there are 4 options. One of them would see a law already in place ahead of the election, which would then be triggered by a yes vote. The other 3 possibilities would not be technically binding, as the government would not be obliged to act on them. Mr Little says he'll explain what binding actually means when he makes an announcement. But electoral law expert Graham Edgeler says there's only one definition.
What Andrew Little meant this morning by "I'm going to define binding," I have no idea. I think generally people have an understanding what binding means, and in this context it means self-executing. Everything that will happen automatically depending on the result.
Mr Little announced in December that the referendum would be binding, but Mr Edgeler says that only lasts as long as a government is in government. So will National commit to keeping legislation, if that's what the people vote for, if a National-led government returns to power? Simon Bridges says if a law was passed in Parliament subject to a referendum, then any political party would have to seriously entertain that and would, quote, be in a sense morally bound to do that. On that basis, Mr Bridges wants the government to go with a full-blown binding referendum.
If I had to decide on this Cabinet paper, I would go with the option 4. I think the other options aren't credible. They don't provide enough information and certainty to allow the referendum to actually be binding. That is because you don't know exactly what it is.
While Mr Bridges isn't a big supporter of legalisation, he's open to the idea of decriminalisation.
My personal basis for opposition is quite simply I worry about the mental health. I've been a Crown prosecutor. I've seen the debilitating effect of cannabis throughout large communities, and I do worry about that. But I tell you what, actually, I'm not nailed in. One of the things this paper goes through is a discussion about decriminalisation versus legalisation.
Both the Greens and New Zealand First declined interviews on the referendum, saying they'd be happy to comment publicly once Cabinet has made a decision. Those answers will all come tomorrow. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Joe Moyer.
It is 17 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. We're keen for your feedback. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or type us an email and flick it through to checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. In Russia, surviving passengers of a fiery plane crash say the plane was struck by lightning before it turned back and made an emergency landing at one of Moscow's main airports. 41 people have been confirmed dead after the Aeroflot plane with 78 people on board bounced along the runway and burst into flames. From Moscow, here's the ABC's Michael Troy.
Aeroflot Flight 1492 came in for what officials describe as a hard emergency landing. But its wheels collapsed and the plane hit the tarmac and burst into flames. Fire trucks were quickly on the scene as passengers began a desperate race to escape the inferno engulfing the rear of the plane. Only the front escape slides could be inflated. People could be seen jumping onto the chute and running clear. But there was little chance everyone would get out alive.
There were 73 passengers and 5 crew members. 28 passengers are now at the airport terminal. Investigators and psychologists are working with them. 5 people have been hospitalised.
41 people, including at least 2 children, lost their lives, while 4 of the 5 crew survived. The Sukhoi Superjet is only a year old and had taken off from Moscow airport bound for Murmansk before developing what officials have described as technical problems. The pilots declared an emergency and turned the plane around shortly after takeoff. Several survivors told reporters they saw a white flash and say the plane may have been hit by lightning. The Kremlin has ordered an investigation and offered its condolences to the families of those who died.
And that was Michael Troy reporting there. Pressure is mounting on victim support to hand out more of the millions of dollars it has collected for those affected by the Christchurch Mosque attacks. Victim support raised $10.5 million and is also in control of almost $3 million raised by 7 predominantly Muslim groups. But so far, only $3 million has been distributed. Conan Young has been talking to donors who say that's not good enough.
Is sitting in a bank account rather than in the pockets of the victims, including by Doug Barry Martin from Nelson.
It's not transparent enough. It appears to be like a Christchurch earthquake thing where it's getting lost in bureaucracy and excuses. When you hear that people are struggling and they're having to borrow money and all this, it's not a good look, is it?
So far, victim support has handed out 2 lots of emergency funding, totalling $3 million. Those injured received 2 payments, one of $5,000, the other of $8,000. Families who lost a loved one were paid 2 payments of $15,000. Another donor, Wellingtonian Liz Takamore, says victim support is still sitting on far too much money.
And then in the same breath, you read about these ones that have lost loved ones that are finding it difficult to meet their mortgage payments. Why? There are some who have lost family members who haven't got the finances to buy food.
Ms Takamore says after feeling so proud of her fellow New Zealanders for donating so much money after the attacks, she'd been left with a sour taste in her mouth to learn less than a third of it had been handed out.
With the money raised, you think to yourself, wow, that's awesome. At least they don't have to worry about anything immediately. No, it won't bring back their families, but it'll help out in some way. That's how it was. And then finding out that they hadn't distributed money to where it should have gone wasn't very nice.
Fellow Wellingtonian and donor Tamara Duran says victim support needs to fulfil its promise to the victims.
All of the words that were coming were we're going to look after these folks. We've got wraparound support. We're with you for the long term. We're all here for you. And that hasn't happened.
It's the people falling through the cracks and not picked up by the likes of ACC that concern her the most.
There are people who may not have lost someone directly, or they did lose someone directly, but the money hasn't carried them through, or there's people with PTSD.
Here's what some of those spoken to on the streets around Christchurch had to say.
I got acknowledgement with my donation, but I've heard nothing since.
Are you happy to they're obviously a very reputable organisation, you're sort of happy for them to get on with doing as they see fit with the money?
I believe it will go to the victims in time. I think it is taking rather a lot of time.
It's kind of a hard one, really, because they got overwhelmed with a hell of a lot of donations, and so it's they need to make the best decision long term for the people involved, I guess. So it's, yeah.
A lot of the need is right now, if their wage earner or whatever is out of action, and quite a few of them are, it's not very good at all because they've got extra expenses and stresses, and it's only adding more to that.
Victim support said it was too busy helping the mosque shooting victims to be interviewed. In a statement, it said it was preparing to hand out a 3rd tranche of funding, but didn't say when this would be available or how much it would involve. Kei oto tahi ahau mō te hōtaka o te ahi nei, ko Conan Young tēnei.
A class action has been launched on behalf of Canterbury earthquake claimants feeling like they've had a raw deal from Southern Response. The government-owned insurance company was responsible for settling claims by AMI policy holders, but a lawyer says hidden costs led to about 3,000 people being underpaid. Katie Todd reports.
In 2011, Christchurch homeowners Brendan and Colleen Ross approached Southern Response to get a detailed repair analysis, or DRA, for their earthquake-damaged house. It gave an estimated cost of repairs, based on which they opted to buy another house. But Mr Ross later learnt the DRA they were given was an abridged version of the one their insurer got, leaving out one page of costs.
Unknown to us, there was separate costing that we became aware of later on after we went through the Privacy Act and got our details from Southern Response. There was another DRA in effect that we never saw.
And so how much do you think that would have cost you?
The difference was about, in our case at least, 140,000.
Ross Williamson and his wife Ellie faced a similar situation in 2012.
We were so worried about a settlement to get out of Christchurch in a hurry. Our health was suffering and we had to get away from the liquefaction. When we found out they did all this out of 130,000, we were quite upset.
In 2014, the matter came before the High Court and Southern Response changed the DRA process. But Christchurch lawyer Grant Cameron says the Rosses and Williamsons are among about 3,000 people who settled but never received compensation, and he estimates about $300 million is owed. This morning, Mr Cameron announced he has the backing of Australian law firm Maurice Blackburn, who are taking class action to recover the money. Mr Williamson says it's great for people like himself and his wife, who couldn't afford to face Southern Response alone.
It's finally got the ball rolling, and as I say, we've been on tenterhooks. First of all, we thought not a lot was going to happen, and after 5 or 6 years, you'd tend to think that, wouldn't you?
Grant Cameron is inviting any other Southern Response policyholders who settled before October the 1st, 2014, to join the class action. He is confident people will recover their missing money and hopes it will be a relatively quick process.
Many class actions, unfortunately, do tend to be protracted. There's a lot at stake, there are a lot of complications, and matters can drag on for a long period of time. However, in this case, everybody has settled, and this government is far more motivated to sit down and look at reasonable ways of resolving it. So my personal expectation is that it may be a matter of months rather than a matter of years.
The class action is happening on a no-win, no-fee basis. Claimants don't know exactly how much they will lose if it's a win, but expect lawyers could take a cut of about 20 to 30%. University of Auckland law lecturer Nikki Chamberlain says class action can provide access to justice when it is otherwise uneconomical or inefficient. But she says people taking part need to check it's the right option with the right boundaries in place.
I would suggest that anybody who is thinking of looking into any class action to carefully review the litigation funding agreement to see if they are happy by which the terms of that agreement.
Checkpoint approached Southern Response for comment, but a spokesperson declined. As the case is currently before the courts, they say it would be inappropriate to comment at this time. Grant Cameron says he is looking forward to seeing the case through to its completion. In Christchurch, for Checkpoint, Katie Todd.
Is the word Pakeha racist? A prominent academic has been left reeling after being described as a racist for using the Māori word. Professor Ekin Veer used the word Pakeha as he urged the Christchurch City Council to improve its efforts towards cultural diversity and encourage more people to vote in elections. The woman who made the comments at the meeting was reportedly a member of the public who was there to support the Hagley Community College and Multicultural Council. So, is the word Pakeha loaded? Checkpoint's Alex Perrottet hit the streets to find out.
The woman reportedly said she knew better than Professor Veer, as he was born overseas and she was born in New Zealand. But most people with a European appearance we spoke to didn't seem to have a problem with the word Pakeha.
Oh, I think it's ridiculous. Where's it going to end? I mean, Pakeha, it's a normal word. I mean, it's getting confusing to know who's being racist to who.
Pakeha? Yeah. Like white person?
Yeah.
No, I don't think it's racist at all. It's the Māori word for white person, so I don't understand how that's offensive.
But if someone were to come up and call me Pakeha, yeah, I'd accept that, no question.
Just everybody's the same. Words don't mean much if you don't give them the meaning.
It's just a word, yeah.
And it's not derogatory?
No, not at all, nah. No, it's just, I would consider it te reo for like a white person in New Zealand. Yeah, I would call myself Pakeha, yeah.
But some people do think the word is derogatory based on their personal experience.
Oh, I suppose I grew up with, you Pakeha fellas, that sort of thing. And I don't like it. I won't call myself a Pakeha. That's what the Maoris call us. I know, it's just a thing I've grown up with. I like Maoris too, but I just don't like being called Pakeha. I'm New Zealand, European.
When I was a child at school with a lot of Maori folk, they used it in a derogatory way.
The Māori dictionary refers to Moki Ture, an expert in Ngāti Porou tribal law, who says it's a shortened version of Pake Pakeha, which originated as a Māori rendition of a chant used by foreign sailors when raising their anchor. Then there's Williams' dictionary, which says it's short for Pakehakeha, which means imaginary beings resembling men with fair skins. But neither source says there's any evidence the word Pakeha was originally used as an insulting term. So where did that idea come from? RNZ's Kura Hautu Māori Shannon Honui-Thompson offers this explanation.
I think over time people have, and wrongfully I would say, broken down the word into parts. So pa, keha. I mean, if you just search the word keha, so to some it means flee. And pa is touch, or as sometimes it can mean the word white, so white flee. What people have done to just deconstruct the word, I think, is really destructive. Pakeha means that you were born in New Zealand, that you're a New Zealander to me, that you're a Kiwi. Why people find it offensive, I'm quite puzzled at, really.
So at least one New Zealander is currently offended by it. But how much do other people actually care?
The thing is, we only hear about the people that have a problem. Everyone else who's just cruising through life, like me, who's like, yeah, I'm a Pakeha. Yeah, cool. You don't hear about us being like, yeah, okay, this is cool. So people are just people, and people are opinionated, and people are easily offended. And now I guess we're in the information age where we're hearing more and more about it, and there's a lot more voices speaking about it on social media and things like that.
I think they need to get a life, really. Fair enough. There's worse things to worry about.
For Checkpoint, Alex Perrottet.
Coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, faulty equipment is to blame for last week's sudden delay to re-enter the Pike River mine. So what's next? Tourist operators in Sri Lanka suffer in the wake of the Easter Sunday attacks, and the family in Milton who are enduring frequent floods. And don't forget, you can check out Alex Perrottet's piece online on our Facebook page, and we would love to hear your feedback. So do get in touch. You can text us on 2101, you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or flick us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. But let's go to the headlines now.
A toddler died from suspected abuse after a hospital repeatedly failed to notice his injuries. The Health and Disability Commissioner, Anthony Hill, says the hospital failed to adequately safeguard the 16-month-old and its failures were systemic. It was only when he was referred to a second hospital that the injuries were noticed. Mr Hill says the social worker at the first hospital then asked for Oranga Tamariki to undertake a safety plan before the boy was sent home, but a doctor discharged him anyway. Victoria University of Wellington will not be changing its name. The University Council decided against challenging the decision of the Minister of Education to deny the university's attempt to change its name. Instead, it will emphasise the word Wellington in its logos and promotional material to set it apart from other Victoria universities around the world. Cabinet has made a final decision on the Cannabis referendum but won't reveal its plan until tomorrow. The government has previously promised a binding referendum alongside the 2020 election on the personal use of cannabis. But according to the details released by National, just one of the four possibilities would be binding. There are increasing calls by people who donated money to the Mosque shooting victims for more of it to be handed out. Victim Support raised $10.5 million and is also in control of almost $3 million raised by 7 predominantly Muslim groups. But so far, only $3 million has been distributed. Victim Support says it is preparing to hand out a third tranche of funding, but does not say when that will be or how much it will involve. The delay in re-entering the Pike River mine was caused by faulty monitoring equipment, as suspected. Last week, the plan to re-enter the access tunnel was called off after high levels of oxygen were detected. The head of the Pike River Recovery Agency, Dingy Pattinson, has confirmed one of the sampling tubes that monitor the atmosphere inside the mine leaked. He says they are continuing to test all the equipment. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. You're listening to Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen, and joining me in the studio is Madison Reedy to talk business. So, Madison, we had a couple of the major banks last week opening their books. What do we know about Westpac? Because it was their turn today, wasn't it?
It was Westpac's turn today. So, their New Zealand business, their half-year net profit for the 6 months ended March was up 15% to $509 million over that period. Now, that did include the one-off gain of selling its stake in the electronic payments provider Paymark. Now, Now, when that was excluded, their profit was up 7%, and its lending also grew by 4%. But its chief executive, David McLean, did give a bit of a warning about its outlook. He said the low margin environment and evolving regulatory outlook will present challenges into the second half of the year. So he's basically saying the rest of this year won't be so bright. Now, when he's talking about the low margin environment there, basically what he's talking about is historically low interest rates at the moment. So similarly to ANZ and BNZ, they mentioned that there's a lot more competition in the mortgage lending game at the moment because interest rates are lower.
Remind us again, what day is it this week? Wednesday or Thursday?
Wednesday
Okay,
is the monetary policy statement.
Yeah.
Whether or not we'll get a rate cut, we're yet to find out. And when he's talking about the regulatory outlook here, he was talking about the Reserve Bank's proposal to make banks hold significantly more capital. Now, that's similarly to ANZ and BNZ that we heard last week. You would have heard me talk about this a couple of times last week. It seems that all of these Australian-owned big banks that operate in New Zealand have taken a stab at this. They've used this opportunity for their financial results to make mention of this for the first time.
It sounds like a concerted message, doesn't it? They're from the same songbook.
It does. It absolutely is. And that's because for all of them, their New Zealand businesses are their darlings, especially in this case with Westpac. Its full Australian group profit was down 24%, down to 3.2 billion Australian dollars. Meanwhile, its New Zealand businesses' profit was up. So it's basically saying our New Zealand businesses are doing well. If you do introduce this proposal, they may not.
And then also today is a study that has found New Zealand isn't taking white-collar crime seriously. What makes them think that?
This is a study that was done by the Associate Dean at Victoria University of Wellington, which, as we now know, is keeping its name. Her name is Lisa Marriott. Now, she looked at the funding given to our fraud prosecuting agencies. That's the Serious Fraud Office, the Financial Markets Authority and Inland Revenue. Now, she found that the Serious Fraud Office's funding that is allocated specifically to investigations, that declined from 10 million in 2013 down to 9.7 million in 2017. Now, she says that that's despite the number of complaints it receiving over that 5-year period, increasing by 90%. So she found that the SFO received 831 complaints to its agency in 2017, and it only investigated 18 of them. Similarly, the funding for the FMA's investigations, that declined from a 7 million figure in 2013 down to 6 million in 2017, and same with Inland Revenue. Its funding declined from 178 million in 2013 down to 173 million in 2017. Now, basically, she said that this consistent underfunding of our fraud prosecuting agencies, she reckons that this proves that we're not taking it seriously, the prosecuting and investigating of white-collar crime in New Zealand. She says that the agencies are doing the best with the little that they do have, and she's not confident that the government has the political will, or any government for that matter, because this 5-year period spans into other governments other than the one that we have now. She said across the board there's been a lack of political will to investigate white-collar crime. And one conclusion that she did draw there, she compared the funding of our fraud prosecuting agencies to the likes of the Ministry of Social Development. And she says that the amount of funding that the MSD has received to chase benefit fraud and investigate benefit fraud is larger than the entire budgets given to the SFO and FMA combined over that period.
Yeah, that's interesting. It'd be interesting to compare the size of the alleged frauds as well against the budgets. And what's been happening on the markets today?
The NZX Top 50 index closed down almost 0.5% tonight, so that's a fall of 97 points to close at 9,960. And the New Zealand dollar is buying at 66.2 US cents and 50.5 British pence. And I have to apologise, the Australian dollar dropped off my chart this evening, so I couldn't give you that figure tonight. I apologise.
Oh, we'll let you off the hook. Madison Reedy there with business. Thank you. Faulty monitoring equipment has been confirmed to have caused the delay in re-entering the Pike River mine. The much-anticipated re-entry of the mine's access tunnel, scheduled for last Friday, was delayed at the 11th hour after high levels of oxygen were detected. Pike River Agency Chief Operating Officer Dingy Patterson is on the line now. Hi, Dingy. What have you found out exactly about the cause?
Yeah, what we have now proven with both simulated and integrity testing is that the issue was faulty hardware, so it's not anything to do with the underground atmospheric conditions whatsoever.
So to be clear, you were getting a false reading, so the atmospheric conditions inside the mine are what? Good for entry?
Yes, they are. What it confirmed was there was no change in the underground atmospheric conditions. It was a false reading caused by a leaking tube.
So have you replaced that tube, or what is the process now?
Yes, we have. We've replaced that tube with a new tube, and we're now carrying out integrity testing on all the other tubes, because we have tubes going to all the other boreholes in the mine as well. So we're carrying out integrity testing on those.
Can you give us a bit of a perspective here? How many of these tubes, I mean, how long do they span down there as a network?
Oh, look, up in the bush in the area we're talking about, we've got around about, I think it's about 7 tubes sampling from boreholes and everything that come back to about 5 kilometres back along to our monitoring station. And we've also got tubes that go underground through the portal as well. So we have 12 monitoring tubes all up.
So how do you know that the readings they are giving you are accurate? You've replaced this one. Do you need to replace them all?
No, we don't. We have to do an integrity test on them all, and the way that's done is you actually disconnect the tube, put a known gas through the tube, a known sample gas through the tube at the top of the borehole, and then you sample that and you read that back at your monitoring point, at the analysing point, and that should match up with a known gas that's in the bottle.
So how long is that going to take you?
Not going to put a time on how long it's going to take, because that is subject to weather conditions, because we have to fly up on the mountain in the bush by helicopter.
Can you give us a bit of a ballpark, though? I'm not asking you for a new re-entry date, but is it a kind of weeks-long exercise, or days or months?
No, it's not weeks. It is only days, but it's weather dependent. So we get a good few days with the weather, then we'll get it all done.
And how long a period of time do you need to be returning good air results to you to be confident that that is the atmosphere in the mine?
No, once we've done the integrity testing, then that's fine. Then we know those readings are fine, because we've done a lot of simulations over the days since Thursday to prove that we simulated the conditions underground with the mine when we start drilling and we lower the pressure. So we wanted to prove it was nothing to do with that was causing those readings. So once we've proved the integrity of all our other tubes, then we're fine.
But you can't rule out the possibility that you may have to replace some of those tubes?
I can't. Until we've done the testing, we don't know.
So you, at the time that the re-entry was put off, you said that you were consulting overseas experts. Did you do that, and what did they say to you?
Yes, we've consulted the overseas experts with all our readings from the minute we were highlighted that there was an issue, and they all support findings of the tests we've done.
So they have confirmed that you are on the right track with your assessment. You've basically been peer-reviewed, Dingy, is that what you're saying?
Yep, most definitely.
Okay, so how do you know, given that the mine has been described as a living entity and you know, prone to changes and fluctuations, this could be a bit of a moving feast, couldn't it, in reality? You could be stop-start again.
Oh, we've always said that along the way that we might have to take operational pauses while we analyse more data and get more information, because there is a lot of unknowns ahead of us. So as the project goes along, we will be getting more information on all the changes to the atmospheric conditions we make underground, because once we start that re-entry, we are continuously making changes with that environment underground.
So given your expertise, would you say that this probably would happen again? I'm not saying the reading, but during the course of this re-entry, there may highly likely be another point where you have to stop for some reason or other. Yes,
it could be for any reason. It could be for, like weather conditions. Adverse weather conditions could affect the tubes, because you've got to remember that the tubes run 5 kilometres up in the bush.
So, Dingy, who's going to make the call on the re-entry date?
We will. The agency will make the call on the re-entry date.
And when do you anticipate you will be able to go public with that?
I'm not putting a date on when I'll go public until I've got all the information from all the integrity testing from all the tubes. And I'm definitely not putting a date on it now, because that only puts the workmen under pressure to try and achieve a certain date.
Understand. I mean, do you feel any pressure at this point, Dingy?
No, not at all.
You're pretty relaxed about it?
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, it's mining. we get these issues in mining and we deal with them.
Really appreciate you joining us this evening. That is Dingy Pattinson giving us an update on the Pike River recovery operation. They have confirmed, as you heard there, as suspected, it is one of these monitoring tubes in the mine that has given a faulty reading. Palestinian officials say an Egyptian-mediated ceasefire agreement has been reached with Israel, putting a stop to a surge of violence in the Gaza Strip and southern Israel. The death toll is mounting on both sides after 3 days of cross-border violence between Israel and militants on the Gaza Strip. The most intense clashes in years have so far left at least 4 Israelis and 23 Palestinians dead. The Israeli army says hundreds of rockets have been fired into Israeli territory, while it has hit 320 targets in response. The BBC's Tom Bateman reports.
Air raid sirens have hardly stopped in southern Israel. More than 500 rockets have been fired from Gaza, one of the deadliest flare-ups between old enemies since they last fought a war in 2014. As the rockets claimed Israeli lives, there was talk of a fierce response from the country's Prime Minister.
I've instructed our forces to continue with massive strikes against terrorists in the Gaza Strip, and the forces around the Gaza Strip will be stepped up with tank, artillery and infantry.
Powerful explosions hit Gaza as the warplanes struck. Israel said it hit hundreds of militant sites. People's homes and lives were lost too. A tower block was hit. Israel said a militant commander was based there. This was a direct hit on a civilian building, nothing to do with militants or factions. This is what we get from the Israeli occupation, this local man said. But officials in Gaza said residents were among the dead. Israel and Hamas have come close to all-out conflict of late, but not as close as this. Militants have been trying to get concessions from Israel, which blockades the Strip and which demands calm on its boundary. But there are signs Hamas has been losing its grip on some smaller militant groups there, a factor which partly triggered this latest flare-up. It also makes what happens next hard to control.
Tom Bateman in Jerusalem. Brunei has backtracked on enforcing laws introduced last month that would have made sex between men and adultery punishable by stoning to death. The Sultan of Brunei has extended a moratorium on the death penalty to cover the new legislation. The rethink follows global outcry over the laws, including boycotts and celebrity protests. The ABC's Isabel Rowe reports.
For Shahran, growing up in Brunei meant learning about the best way to kill people like him.
As a kid, we were taught, the stones should not be too big, lest they kill the person too quickly.
Shahran told the BBC he had to hide his sexuality while in Brunei.
I didn't admit to myself I was gay until I went to the UK, and then I came out to myself, went back, and then it started. Then I felt fearful.
Homosexuality is already illegal in the Islamic country, but the death penalty hasn't been enforced since 1957. So it came as a shock to human rights activists around the world when Brunei's Sultan Hassan al-Bolkiah announced a new strict interpretation of Islamic laws, punishing sodomy, adultery and rape with death, including by stoning. It sparked an international response when high-profile celebrities such as George Clooney called for boycotts of the Sultan's hotels. Now, Sultan Hassan al-Bolkiah says his country will extend its moratorium on the death penalty.
Inilah MIB, konsep keramat yang telah berjaya.
This is the country's ideology, Malay Islamic monarchy, the MIB. It's a successful, sacred concept of a fair and happy nation where its people are united. System MIB has proven to be very friendly to the world. Anyone who visits this country will have a sweet experience in a safe and harmonious atmosphere and receive good services. This is the reality in Brunei, an MIB nation. Without this ideology, it's not Brunei.
Director of the Centre for Indonesian Law, Islam and Society at the University of Melbourne, Professor Tim Lindsay, is surprised by the Sultan's backtrack.
The fact that he's backed away from it now by maintaining the moratorium suggests that international criticism and pressure has had some real effect on him.
While the Brunei government also restricts free speech, Professor Lindsay says it's hard to know how much of the country's 500,000 residents would agree with the new Sharia laws. But he says the push for stricter Islamic law is part of a trend in Southeast Asia.
In Indonesia, in Aceh, there's public caning for homosexual people, and that has been carried out and implemented. Now, that's a long way away from stoning, but there was an attempt to introduce stoning as well in Aceh, which has failed. So there is a trend towards the introduction of more conservative, Islamically based punishments across Southeast Asia, but this is by far the most extreme.
Can you see pressure from the international community being able to prevent him from lifting that moratorium, or do you think he might at some point allow the death penalty?
It's very hard to predict the Sultan's behaviour. I would have thought that the Sultan was fairly immune to international criticism, but it does seem that he has paused in the face of criticism, not just from celebrities, but from international organisations and from the UN. But what happens in the future, I think, is quite unpredictable.
Tim Lindsay from the University of Melbourne ending that report from the ABC's Isabel Rowe. Travellers are cancelling their holidays en masse to Sri Lanka in the wake of the Easter Sunday attacks. And as David Doyle reports, that sent the country's $4.4 billion tourism industry reeling. David Doyle reports.
This hotel in Sri Lanka's famous beach resort of Bentota should be overflowing with customers. It was previously fully booked, but after the devastating Easter Sunday attacks, every one of its guests cancelled. Leaving Saman Mali Kolone, owner of the 7-room Warahina Beach Hotel, alone with her worries.
Whatever problems we had in the past were not problems. This is a problem. This is the biggest problem we have faced.
And she's not the only one. Sri Lanka's $4.4 billion tourism industry is reeling from cancellations as travellers shun the island after the multiple suicide bombings that killed more than 250 people. The country's tourism bureau says cancellation rates at hotels across the country averaged 70% as of Saturday, and that the industry is facing lost revenues of $750 million this year. That's prompted Sri Lankan President Maithripala Sirisena to tell tourists it's safe to visit.
It's a big blow to the economy as well as for the tourism industry. It's important to restore tourism to where it was before the attacks. For that, tourists need security. There's a level of normality in the country. Tourists can come now. We will provide them with full security.
Back in Bentota, waiters set out glasses for an empty restaurant, and tuk-tuk drivers wait for absent customers, as Sri Lanka's tourism industry prays for a turning of the tide.
It is about 8 minutes away from 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. We're getting a lot of feedback from you about what the word Pakeha means to you and how you feel about it. Keep it coming. You can contact us about anything else you've heard on the program too. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz, and we'll get to some of that feedback later in the program. Now though to Otago, where a family is at the mercy of floods that sweep into their house every couple of years. When the Lambert family bought their cottage in 2006, it had been 15 years since the last big flood hit the small town of Milton. Since then, it's flooded every 2 or 3 years, inundating their home. They say they've tried to sell or lift their house above the flood line, but have faced obstacles at every turn. Reporter Tess Brunton and cameraman Simon Rogers visited the Lambert family at their Milton home.
Chris and Stephanie Lambert had barely moved into the new home in Milton when the town experienced its largest flood on record. Water flowed through the house, reaching a depth of about a handspan inside. It was more than knee-deep on the rest of their section. Since then, it's flooded approximately every 2 to 3 years. The last flood was in November. Mr. Lambert says the regular flooding damages their property, their mental health, and the water is often contaminated.
Well, everything goes underwater. There's not a lot of tide marks around here because there's nothing to leave a mark on anything, but there's one there which is definitely higher than that dog kennel. You find dead animals floating around that come washing off the hills.
2007, I think it went through the sewage treatment station, so, everything you've got to treat it as contaminated as well.
Yeah, it's a contaminated site every time we flood now.
He says the memory of water rising towards his front door will never go away.
Once it starts coming over the main road, Within about an hour, the whole section's underwater. It's, as soon as it busts over the main road, that's it. Oof. The river moves over to this road.
The property is near Milton's industrial zone, nestled between two branches of the Tokomariro River. During floods, their street and property becomes part of the river, flowing down the floodway corridor. The Clutha District Council says the area is clearly shown as flood-prone in the 1998 District Plan. It also detailed the floodplain in a flood risk management strategy published by the Clutha District Council and the Otago Regional Council in 2012. Chris Lambert says they knew the property was at risk of floods, but they thought it would be an issue every decade or two, not every couple of years.
It was a quaint 100-year-old cottage. Outside there were gardens all around the house. The flood's taken all those away. It was a really nice house. That room in there was fully wallpapered, but the first flood, the dampness from it all made all the wallpaper fall off. So that was a waste of time. We didn't do it. But it was a nice house when we bought the place.
The Clutha District Council says the only real solution for flood-prone dwellings is to raise them above the expected flood height. Mr Lambert says they tried to raise the house or buy a relocatable home after receiving a $31,000 settlement from their insurer. But he says the bank told them the money needed to be used to ensure they didn't default on their mortgage. Mr Lambert says they're stuck because no one will buy a house that can't be insured for flooding, and they can't afford to raise the house or move and risk defaulting on their mortgage. Stephanie Lambert says they've lost priceless keepsakes, furniture and electrical goods to the floodwaters, and the stress and costs keep rising.
I do think, where could we be? We didn't even want to be in this house by this stage. It was a start out. The kids are small, I think how different our lives could have been if we hadn't been flooded, if we had been able to get the bigger house, lots of things, the what ifs. Because it really mentally just drains you and having to deal with everything that comes with it.
Their son, 16-year-old Cairo, helps to protect their home when there is a flood warning. He and his brother Logan, who is 13, grew up in the house.
Lifting things up, I guess.
Packing up stuff.
Yeah, because Logan was, I think the first time he was old enough to be helping with stuff, he was quite scared of everything. Obviously, you would be. And yeah, we didn't have, that was like we had an hour's time with that one.
Their cat Missy went missing during the 2015 flood.
In 2015, it had started flooding in the house while we were packing everything up. And we were trying to keep track of everything, trying to keep track of where the cats were, hoping they'd be fine, but that didn't happen.
The Lamberts plan to ask the Clutha District Council to buy them out or help relocate them out of their home. In the meantime, they're bracing for the next big flood. In Milton for Checkpoint, Cortes Brunton, Tēnei.
And if you've been listening to Tessa's piece, it will go up online and it will show you exactly what the Lamberts are talking about. If you have a look at some of the pictures, you can see how high the floodwaters are coming up on their property every time. After leading days of protests in Venezuela against the rule of President Nicolas Maduro, the opposition leader Juan Guaido appears to have failed in his latest attempt to persuade the military to back him. Mr Maduro has declared victory, saying he stopped Mr Guaido and the US from instigating what he called a deranged coup against him. The BBC's Nick Bryant reports from Venezuela's capital, Caracas.
The passion is still in evidence. It's the numbers that are dwindling. This demonstration took place under the statue of America's first president, George Washington, the leader of a successful uprising. But Venezuela's self-styled Operation Liberty is clearly losing momentum. We have to wait a little bit longer, said this student, and see if we can reach our goal. We want the government to leave, said this woman wearily. We don't have anything. We can't be happy. Protesters presented petitions to the security forces, words demanding change that were quickly reduced to cinders.
Midweek, they were calling for the largest demonstrations in Venezuelan history. By the weekend, they've been reduced to these roadside protests. Another indication of how this popular uprising has petered out.
For a fleeting, fiery moment this week, it looked like the uprising might succeed. But in what's essentially become a battle for the hearts and minds of the military, the key power player in Venezuela, the armed forces remain brutally loyal to the president. So no wonder the mood of triumphalism from Nicolas Maduro, this sea of green fatigues at a fortress in Caracas, proof that he's survived yet another crisis. Had a very busy few days. Yeah. This is the opposition leader who's seeking to oust him, Juan Guaido. The last 7 days just didn't go to plan. Juan Guaido, was this the week when you missed your chance? When you botched your chance?
El único que se desbasta o se hace daño es Maduro.
The only person hurt this week is Maduro. He's losing again and again. He's increasingly weak, increasingly alone, and has no international support. On the contrary, we gain acceptance, support, and future options.
Every afternoon on a mountain overlooking the capital, this cannon is fired in honor of President Maduro's mentor, Hugo Chavez. Nothing has disrupted that martial routine. For the military has reasserted its dominance in Venezuela, and for now, it's upholding the status quo.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leia tawa tēnei. A South Auckland community is fighting plans to transform a local children's care facility into a youth prison, saying it will put neighbouring families at risk. The Whakatakapokai care facility in Manurewa currently houses up to 20 young people being looked after by Oranga Tamariki. The department is going to Environment Court this month to have the site redesignated to accommodate youth offenders. Manurewa resident Dean Andre says the area already has 3 prisons and a 4th is an unfair burden on the community.
And all those people that come and visit other people in prisons, where do they stay? They stay in Manurewa. They bring their problems and their troubles and their difficulties with them when they stay, and the community has to interact with all of those things on a daily basis. And another prison in the area is only going to make that worse.
Dean Andre says Manurewa locals will be making submissions opposing the facility being redesignated as a youth prison. The Health and Disability Commissioner has criticised a hospital for failing to notice the multiple injuries suffered by a toddler who died from abuse after being sent home. Despite the 16-month-old being taken to the hospital 4 times, staff didn't spot his fractured leg or other injuries, including bruising, a broken tooth and blackened fingernails. The Commissioner, Anthony Hill, says the injuries were only noticed when the toddler was referred to a second hospital. He says the failures at the first hospital were systemic. The District Health Board has been ordered to follow up with Oranga Tamariki and the police on the Commissioner's findings. The Prime Minister says she considers the leak of a cabinet paper to be a serious matter, but won't launch a formal inquiry. The National Party has questioned whether the government's cannabis referendum will truly be binding, after revealing what it says were the 4 options ministers had to consider. Jacinda Ardern says the cabinet paper would have been circulated more widely than just ministers, and she expects everyone to take confidentiality seriously. She's reiterated that message to ministers, but won't be taking it any further.
Look, I actually don't want to spend too much time being bogged down by that question. I've again restated my expectations of both Cabinet, but more broadly than that.
Jacinda Ardern says the Justice Minister will announce the details of the plan for the referendum tomorrow, after Cabinet made its final decision today. A 10-week trial, which began today in the High Court at Wellington, involves one of the biggest tax fraud cases ever seen in this country. 11 members of a family of Thai restaurateurs are accused of tax fraud and money laundering and face 64 charges between them. The Crown lawyer Andrew Instone told Justice Simon France that for 7 years the defendants worked together to evade paying taxes for 14 companies they were in charge of. That included failing to bank cash they received from customers.
Instead, they bank cash into their personal accounts or into other family members' personal accounts. Total, the Crown says the businesses omitted $12 million worth of cash from their GST and income tax returns.
Andrew Instone said the defendants are also accused of working together to evade paying personal income tax. It's been confirmed 41 people died after a Russian plane made an emergency landing and burst into flames at Sheremetyevo airport in Moscow. Videos on social media show passengers using emergency exit slides to escape the burning Aeroflot jet, which is carrying 78 passengers and crew. One witness says it was a miracle anyone survived. Officials say there are 37 survivors, 33 passengers and 4 people of the crew. 5 people are in hospital. The Boeing Corporation has admitted it knew well over a year before the first crash of a 737 MAX plane in Indonesia last year that a warning light linked to a key sensor in a jet wasn't working on many of the planes. The fault began the sequence of events which has been found to have caused 2 crashes of the MAX 8, which killed a combined total of 346 people. In a statement, Boeing says it did not inform the airlines involved or the Federal Aviation Administration until after the October crash. The name of Victoria University of Wellington will not be changing. The University Council decided against challenging the decision of the Minister of Education, Chris Hipkins, to deny the university its attempt to change its name. Instead, it will emphasise the word Wellington in its logos and promotional material to set it apart from other Victoria universities around the world. The Vice-Chancellor, Grant Guilford, says it was a simple decision in the end.
Overriding in our decision has been that the New Zealand public expects better things from a university than taking a minister to court. So we've decided to set aside those concerns and move forward, draw a line under this.
Grant Guilford says the university will be changing its Māori name to Te Herenga Waka, which means the hitching post of your waka. It's coming up to 6:05. The Central Pulse and Southern Steel meet in a top-of-the-table ANZ Netball Premiership match tonight in Invercargill, but the Pulse will have to buck history if they're to maintain their unbeaten run. The Pulse have never beaten the Steel in Invercargill, however the Pulse did enjoy a 16-goal win when the two sides last met in Dunedin. The Pulse are on a 12-game winning streak, but the second-placed Steel will be banking on a raucous home crowd to help them topple the Pulse. A short time ago, Australia were 148 for 4 after 30 overs, needing 216 to beat the New Zealand 11 in the first of 3 practice matches in the lead-up to the Cricket World Cup. A 137-run stand between Tom Blundell and Will Young helped New Zealand to 215, with Blundell top scoring with 77. The match in Brisbane also marked the return of David Warner and Steve Smith to Australian colours, having served their 1-year bans after the Cape Town ball tampering affair. Warner made 39 and Smith 22. The New Zealand women's 3x3 basketball team has qualified for the World Cup after finishing third at the qualifying tournament in Puerto Rico. The owner of disqualified Kentucky Derby winner Maximum Security says he may appeal the decision to the US federal courts. Maximum Security was ruled to have interfered with several horses when turning for home, with outsider and second-placed Country House declared the winner. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, our sportscaster Peter Lamp remembers Nev McEwen, an all-black lock in 1963. Nev's not dead, but he has written a book. There's a window on the world of Catherine Holbater, a specialist in 8 communication, especially the non-human ones, and Damien Fenton remembers the Falklands War, which took place in the South Atlantic 37 years ago this month. It's all on Nights with me, Brian Crump, from after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. For Northland, Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula, cloudy periods with isolated light showers in the east. Waikato to Wellington, including Bay of Plenty and central high country, mainly fine, areas of cloud or fog tomorrow morning. For Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, cloudy periods with isolated light showers. For all the South Island, fine weather, apart from areas of morning and evening cloud or fog, more persistent about the east coast. At the Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy with a chance of a light shower or 2. It's coming up to 6:08 and you're with RNZ National.
Thanks, Susanna. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. A South Auckland community is fighting plans for a Manurewa children's care facility in their backyard, saying it's essentially a children's prison and will put families at risk. The Whakataka Pōkai Care Facility currently houses up to 20 young people who are being looked after by Oranga Tamariki. But with the youth court age rising to include teenagers up to 18 years old in July, plans are underway to have the facility repurposed to accommodate an increase in young offenders. Our reporter Nita Blake-Person and cameraman Nick Monroe spoke to local resident Dean Andre outside the facility about his concerns.
Currently this facility is underused and they're using it as a care and protection hub, but all that really means is that when they get children coming into their care and needing protection, they assess them here and then they put them at houses located in the community. because the current policy is to put children that need care and protection into houses in the community. This is too much prison-like for those sorts of children. They're not prisoners, they're not offenders. Those children are simply homeless, needy children who need proper care and attention. So they don't keep them here anymore, they put them out into houses in the community, which is appropriate. I support that.
How will that change under these proposed plans?
Well, this will become a youth prison. It will have up to 30 beds. Now, they're saying 20 initially, but in actual fact, they have admitted in public that they will have up to 30 beds here for youth prisoners. And because they're moving the care and protection hub out, yes, it might take a year or two before they get up to 30, but they will ultimately have 30 prisoners here on a daily basis.
Some people say this is just NIMBYism. These people have to go somewhere and this is as good a place as any. What do you say to that?
Well, two things. First of all, we had an agreement with the government that this was not appropriate. We experienced a lot of burglaries, a lot of car theft, a lot of trouble, and a very high rate of prison escapes in the 1990s. And the government acknowledged that at the time. And then they gave their word that they would close the facility to youth justice offenders and they would move them to Korowai, Manaki and Wiri and house them there. The second thing is that the people saying that we're NIMBYs, they don't have a single prison in their backyard. None of them choose to live next to a prison. Now, if you ask all these people, they say, oh, we're happy to live next to a prison, but none of them exercise that choice. Why don't they go and live next to a prison? Because nobody wants to live next to a prison.
And that was Manurewa resident Dean Andre speaking to our reporter Nita Blake-Person. Oranga Tamariki declined to be interviewed on this issue as it has a case before the Environment Court to have the facility redesignated to allow youth offenders to be housed there. However, in a statement, it said it had engaged with the community on the issue and youth justice residences provide a safe and secure environment for young people to get their lives back on track. The Christchurch City Council is going to miss its self-imposed deadline for getting chlorine out of most of the city's water supply. Chlorination was introduced in May last year after some of the city's wells were found to be at risk of contamination. That sparked many complaints from residents about the strong taste, smell and increase in skin conditions. At the time, the council wanted the city to be chlorine-free in a year. But this afternoon, the council revealed only 47 wellheads have been upgraded, while work is still underway or scheduled for a further 54. There are 140 below-ground wellheads in total throughout the city. The council had hoped that it would be able to introduce temporary measures at many wells so most of the chlorine could be removed by its own deadline. But as the council's Water Supply Improvement Program Manager Helen Beaumont explained to our reporter Logan Church, that wasn't possible.
Back in February, we had anticipated that we'd have 90% of the water chlorine-free by the end of May, but we've run into a few delays at some of our sites, and we've now dropped that back to 75% of the water by the end of May.
Why have we had delays? What are they?
There's a number of things, but the biggest single thing is that there are fewer wells that were suitable for those temporary below-ground improvements. So back late last year, we had estimated that perhaps 42 wells where it was possible to do those improvements. We thought privately in-house that probably 20 to 25 of those would turn out to be practical, but actually only 11 have proved to be suitable for that work. So that has extended the program quite a lot for us.
So what does that mean for those wells that aren't part of that 11 where these temporary below-ground improvements could be made? What does it mean for those other wells?
So those ones are now programmed for the full improvement works, and they'll all be brought above ground. And that work is all timetabled through so some of them will be done this winter, some of them will be done in the summer, and some of them will be done the following winter.
Just briefly running through the reasons for the delays listed in the report going to council on Thursday. Valve, pipework and pump failures encountered during repair works. What happened there?
So that's if we've gone into a site, and one happened last week where we went into one of the sites in the west zone. It was either Denton or Dunbars, can't remember which one it was, and they turned the valves off to isolate the wells, and one of the valves failed. So we had to schedule some works to replace that valve. So we've done that, and that work's now back on track. So we sometimes come into that sort of something will fail when you've changed something else at the pump station. and you need to just go around again and get those things repaired. Some of the design issues we've had have been particularly where we've had repairs done post-earthquakes, and the repairs are fantastic and the infrastructure in place is very good, but the documentation in that post-earthquake period left a little to be desired. So what we found on site wasn't exactly what we thought we had on that site.
Oh, I see.
That's also caused a delay.
I see. So the records that the council had didn't necessarily match up with what was actually there.
Yeah, particularly for, as I say, for those post-earthquake repairs when everything was done extraordinarily quickly.
And just finally, in that wee list there, contractor optimism when proposing the work program. Was someone too optimistic?
Some of them were. So when we went out to tender, we asked people to provide us with an outline of the works that they were proposing to do and a price, and then a timetable for those works. And some of those timetables have turned out to be more optimistic than they can actually deliver on once they began the works.
Helen Beaumont speaking to Checkpoint reporter Logan Church. Across the Tasman now, where rugby union's crisis over one of its star players is yet to be resolved. Over the weekend, an independent Rugby Australia panel held a hearing on whether Israel Folau breached its players' code of conduct with a homophobic social media post. It was meant to finish yesterday, but lawyers for both sides say more time is needed. Meanwhile, a World Cup winning Australian captain has come to Folau's defence, criticising the Wallabies coach and teammates for speaking out against him. The ABC's Lexi Metherell reports.
The hearing was set down for 2 days, but lawyers for Israel Folau and Rugby Australia agreed more time is needed to decide the player's future. Former Wallaby and Sydney Morning Herald columnist Peter Fitzsimons.
I think the outcome of this inquiry is so important. Rugby union could be forgiven for taking its time and getting it right.
Rugby Australia wants the 30-year-old gone, accusing him of committing a high-level breach of the player's code of conduct. Nearly a month ago, the devout Pentecostal Christian declared on his social media platforms that hell awaits homosexuals unless they repent. Peter Fitzsimons.
My own belief is that Israel Folau is very likely gone a million, and that'll be what the inquiry will find. There are very few professions in Australia whereby if you put on social media, gays are going to burn in hell on a Monday, you'll find yourself in employment on a Tuesday.
Members of Folau's church congregation insist his message was made in love, not hate.
He's not worrying about what happens now or what will happen later. Once we all do die, we come under judgment when God does return. So we're proud of the servant that he is and the God that is within him, that he's able to profess and stand strong and firm and steadfast in the faith that he has for our Lord and Saviour Jesus Christ.
His father, Annie, says his son puts his faith before his rugby career.
Because we don't know what is the God plan for him. But I talked to him and he said whatever God decision to his life, he will accept. He has a strong faith in him.
The former Wallaby captain, Nick Farr-Jones, provided a statement in support of Folau to the hearing. The practising Christian has spoken to ABC News Radio's Tracy Holmes and has slammed the attitude of Wallabies coach Michael Checker and senior players.
Of course he should keep his job, absolutely, but I think...
Can the Wallabies come together and unify as a team if he's back in?
I find it outrageous that coach and a whole bunch of senior players have spoken against him. I think it's probably incompatible.
Peter Fitzsimons.
Nick Farr-Jones was one of the greatest ever Wallabies and greatest ever captains and a great friend of mine. I disagree with him on this subject. I don't think Michael Checker was out of line whatsoever. I don't think the senior players were out of line. They were speaking from the heart, and there is no doubt whatsoever Israel Folau has lost the dressing room.
The only rugby league player ever to come out as gay, Ian Roberts, has spoken out, saying views of the kind espoused by Folau lead to the suicides of young and vulnerable people. Peter Fitzsimons.
This is not simply a matter of freedom of religion. This is about spouting nonsense. So if you put in the public domain that gays are going to go to hell, and you're implying that there's a choice to be made, and if you make the wrong choice, you're going to go to hell, you're putting out there damaging nonsense.
Rugby Australia's Code of Conduct hearing is set to resume tomorrow.
Lexi Metherell reporting there from Australia. They call it the winterless north, but the homeless know better. In Whangarei, those without a roof over their head are hoping against hope there'll be a night shelter for them before the cold weather arrives. The city's day centre for the homeless, Open Arms, says about 100 people are sleeping rough or in their cars, and their numbers now include people with serious disabilities, those who need wheelchairs or crutches to get around. And for homeless women, there are added risks to sleeping rough. Our Northland reporter Lois Williams spoke to one woman who's nearly 60 and battles the twin demons of alcohol and meth. Her recommendation for survival on the streets? Sleep on your back to save your hips and sleep with one eye open.
I'm not so bad because I've lived rough in Auckland, and that was worse because it was dangerous. And when you're raped, you're expected not to report it. You've got to bite the bullet.
Were you raped?
No. Because I'm a kickboxer.
Okay, but you knew women who were?
Yes, and they got in deep trouble for reporting it, which is ridiculous.
Deep trouble with who?
The rapists and the street people. Auckland, our people up here are quite kind, and we've got a good clique to look after each other.
But in Auckland it's a different story.
Oh, it's hard news. It's hard.
Okay.
You've got to sneak to your spot and sneak out because of that.
Yeah.
But it tips away at your Wairoa. Like sometimes we get some young men in here and they're just too young to be out here. And I try and welcome them, it's all right, we're in the same boat. But here with showers and washing machines, it helps, clothing. It's brilliant.
Yeah.
But as a wahine out here, around dusk I'm looking for a spot, somewhere safe. I've got one spot down by the railway station bridge. It's on a walkway, but there's a bit of a bank, and I'm safe there and it's quiet. But if it rains I get wet, and I turn up here in the morning wet. And it's horrible.
So do you think sounds like we need a night shelter?
Yes, because I've lived on the streets in Auckland, and the night shelter in Auckland was a 3-week maximum to stay, which helped rebalance you. And they've got housing court flats in Auckland, but I'd rather just a little 1-bedroom flat that I can afford and still have power and food.
That's your dream?
Yeah.
And that's our Northland reporter Lois Williams speaking to a woman who is sleeping rough in Whangarei. An ecologist wants DOC to impose daily limits on the number of visitors to Awaroa Inlet, the so-called People's Beach, bought through a crowdfunding campaign. Massey University's Professor Steve Trewick has been visiting the beach for more than 2 decades and believes publicity to save it has pushed up visitor numbers and the use of quad bikes and water taxis in the area that can't be reached by road. And he fears it could damage the pristine environment.
In the last few years, there's been a substantial increase in the number of quad bikes on the beach, and it's only a small beach. So if a quad bike goes past you, you jolly well know it if you haven't got out of the way. And it's, on the whole, it's unnecessary. Now, people could argue that, well, that's what I like to do on the beach. And perhaps that is what people, on the whole, the majority want to do. They want to drive vehicles up and down on the beach. If that's the case, then we have to completely change our sort of perspective on a holiday, on the beach experience, on the summer experience.
Are we just getting lazier?
I think there is a tendency towards lazy, and in the particular case of Awaroa, there are several commercial organisations who are bringing people in, enticing people in, offering a wonderful experience, mostly built around the fact that it is a lovely natural place with tides and birds and sun and wind, but then saving them the effort of having to carry their bags a little way to the place they're staying. So those organisations every day for every water taxi that turns up bring down a quad bike and a trailer and drive along the beach, the very beach that people mostly are coming to see to experience the wilderness. And that really does conflict.
Well, the reason that this place is on our radar, or on many people's radar, is because it was made famous, if you like, by a campaign to save it from private ownership. So have we actually done the environment there a disservice?
Well, it seems almost like that. We've certainly challenged our objectives. When that campaign came about, it was fantastic that so many people got behind and said, well, look, no, this is a piece of New Zealand. We've got to make sure that we keep it as a piece of New Zealand for everyone. And in a sense, that's happened. Everyone can come down and get picked up off the beach and driven to their accommodation and driven back and put back on a water taxi and leave. But you then start wondering, well, is that what we were saving it for? And I think... Well, I'm guessing. I don't know, and this is why we're interested in opening up this sort of conversation.
So what should we do then?
Intended?
So what should we do?
Well, in that case, I think that there are questions that can be raised about the legality, apart from anything else, of driving quad bikes up and down on that beach. But it's more than a legal issue. It's about the decisions that we make and the way we use our resources and the consideration we have for other people, but also for the environment. And this is a very small example, a tiny example tucked away in New Zealand of how we people will conflict over the use of resources and have, in the end, a sort of a downward spiralling impact. The same story is going on, obviously, on a massive scale around the world, from everything from agriculture to, the water quality. There's a concept that we refer to as the tragedy of the commons, which encapsulates this very nicely. When you have a space that's available for all to use, and you'd think that was a positive and good thing for the community, sadly, there tends to be this sort of downgrading of the quality of that resource because some people tend to be a bit more greedy than others, and you can't account for that. So
would you suggest limiting access then?
I think something seriously has to be done about the quad bikes, and you just decide, look, if you're going there, you don't need to use a quad bike to go across the estuary or to get along the beach.
So ban them.
As far as numbers are concerned, perhaps there does need to be a decision made about limiting how many visitors there are, not in a sort of a NIMBYist way that makes it better for a few individuals that do go, but so that the experience is of high quality as possible for as many people as possible. So you've just kind of put a limit on each day's number of people. And Department of Conservation, of course, has been doing that on some of the great walking tracks.
So time to consider doing that for Awaroa as well, in your view?
It may be that we've got to do that, and the only way we can do it easily is by imposing some limits on the water taxis. Of course, that's not a particularly nice thing to say in one way because they're running a livelihood out of it. But the conversation has to be had between those people, between the people using the place, the people who are running businesses there, and the people who don't really have a voice. They just go there and want to experience it.
And that is Professor Steve Trewick. Now, the Department of Conservation Golden Bay Operations Manager Dave Winterburn told Checkpoint in a statement that we're aware there's sporadic quad bike and tractor use by 2 or 3 permanent residents and batch owners at Awaroa. But DOC hasn't noticed any significant increase in tractor or quad bike use at Awaroa as a result of the beach becoming part of the Abel Tasman National Park. However, there may have been a change where the quad bikes and tractors are being driven following cyclones that hit Awaroa last year. And it says DOC and Project Janzoon are developing plans to better protect native birds breeding at Awaroa Sandspit and using barriers to restrict vehicles and foot traffic on the sandspit there. Time for a bit of your feedback now, and a lot of it has been coming in about a story that we ran earlier in the show, asking how you feel about the word Pakeha. This follows on from one man at a Christchurch City Council meeting who was accused of being racist for using the word. Grant says, as a human being first, I object to being designated a European New Zealander, generic, he says in brackets, given my ancestors came in 1841. I am not European, I am Pakeha, and think and act within that paradigm paradigm, not some notional idea of being some sort of white man from the large area of Europe. Ridiculous, says Grant, and sort of patronising and possibly insulting. Thanks for your feedback, Grant. Barbara says, I love having my own identity as a Pakeha. No other country has Pakeha people. We are fortunate to have a special label that locates us in Aotearoa, but we've had a bit on from the other side of the fence as well. This person says, Pakeha, the word is used pejoratively. When so used, I find it offensive. It smacks of other ethnic groups being inferior to tangata whenua. I also do not allow myself to be stated as Pakeha on forms, etc. I don't care what conclusions anyone draws from it. I am exercising my personal choice. This one though, funny this should come up this evening. I was filling out an immunisation form for my 12-year-old daughter. I paused at the ethnicity box and discussed it with her. I said I don't feel European, I'm more comfortable with Pakeha. She too agreed and said Europe was near England. I think this suggests that Pakeha is more familiar and true to our nation. This one, I prefer to be identified as Pakeha, which connects me with the country I belong to. Another person though says, I experience the use of the word Pakeha as abusive and accompanied by severe aggression. Some people don't like it because of life experiences, but for sure its place, the term New Zealand European won't cause offence, just like the term Afro-American has become acceptable in the US. Proudly Pakeha, says Rona though. See you tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. A South Auckland community is fighting plans to transform a local children's care facility into a youth prison, saying it will put neighbouring families at risk. The Health and Disability Commissioner has criticised a hospital for failing to notice the multiple injuries suffered by a toddler who died from abuse after being sent home. The Prime Minister says she considers the leak of a cabinet paper to be a serious matter, but won't launch a formal inquiry after National released details into the government's Cannabis referendum. The name Victoria University of Wellington will remain as it is, but the branding will change to place more emphasis on the word Wellington. And 41 people died after a Russian plane made an emergency landing at Sheremetyevo Airport in Moscow. Our next news will be at 7.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
The system has been structured over the last few years to treat beneficiaries in all sorts of punitive